Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me as always is Ken. How are you, Ken?
Exceptionally well. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 110. How are you today, Rory?
I'm fine. It's a bit foggy here at Counselling Towers, but apart from that, we're at the time of the recording, we're basking on the pre-spring. Tomorrow will be British summertime here in the UK, and the gateway to summer's opening. So, yeah, what a great time to be. Yes.
Love it. The promise of good things to come. And that promise extends to today's episode. What can you expect from episode 110? We're going to start off by speaking about dual or conflicting relationships within counselling, going into practice matters that delve into all things practice, where Rory is going to be looking at working with visual impairment within the therapy room. And we're going to be closing today's episode by speaking about counselling and the law. Now, I'm really kind of drawn to working with visual impairment. Rory, what can we expect from that little section?
Well, I'm going to be talking about how to work with people who are visually impaired, how some of the potholes that we can find ourselves falling into because we may not be sure how to work with someone, or we may be scared of offending someone, frightened of offending, and sometimes that fear of offending can really impact on the relationship. So I'm going to be talking in depth about how to work with someone as you would with anybody. It's just someone who has a visual impairment.
Topic close to my heart. So let's start episode 110 with our first topic today: dual relationships or conflicting relationships within therapy. Tell me more, Rory.
Yes, well, the BACP ethical framework talks about dual relationships. And dual relationships is when you are working with a client and you have another relationship. So, for instance, counselling someone who you employ would be a dual relationship. Counselling a friend would be a dual relationship. But they can get a little tricky. What happens if you're part of an organisation? Maybe you go to a church or a mosque or a shul, and you find yourself in the congregation, and you find that one of the people in the congregation is one of your clients. How does that work? And there's a very good reason, I think, for not having dual relationships. It's very, very confusing because clients come to us for therapy, and they should see us as their therapist. And if they see us in any other role, they may be talking about something about the other role, work or a social setting or that type of thing. That could be confusing. And also, if you're working with someone in another setting, how open are they going to be? So many years ago, I had someone phone up when I used to train. I used to have this every year, if I'm honest. And someone said, "Oh, yes, I'd like to become a counsellor." That's fine. Yeah, I work in HR, human resources. And I thought that as we're having a lot of redundancies, I could counsel the people. And so I used to say, so you're the person who's saying to the person in front of you, your job's coming to an end, your job role's now defunct. And by the way, can I be a counsellor? I said, do you not think that might be a bit of a difficulty?
Yeah,
Absolutely
definitely.
Can.
Oh, wow. I couldn't agree more with that. And it's a tricky one. It's a tricky topic because it comes up often, and it comes up often in our Facebook group, which is where we take a lot of our topics for conversation from. And if you haven't joined our Facebook group, get in there. Tens of thousands of members, students of counselling from all over the world, practicing counsellors, supervisors, tutors, all hang out and we speak all things counselling. You can find that just going on to Facebook, putting in the words Counselling Tutor. We're right there at the top. Knock on the door. We will open that for you. And this is a topic that comes up again and again. And some people finding it difficult to know when it is a conflicting role. But I think you very clearly pointed out some of the dangers of that, Rory, the potholes that lie in wait for those dual relationships. And the other side of that is from us as the counsellor. So when we counsel a client, it's a contracted relationship. It's a very specific relationship. And they come in and we have that blank slate in that we meet that person, who they are and how they present in our therapy room. We have no prior knowledge to a road that they have walked, things that they have done, the personality that they exhibit outside, and we accept them wholly as they come into our therapy room. However, if we know them from outside of the therapy room, we have some kind of knowledge of that, then we have the danger of a prejudging for that person and not seeing them as they are in the therapy room, but thinking, oh, but that doesn't match what I know from you from 2 years ago, or whatever that may be. And that has it has the ability to contaminate greatly the therapeutic relationship, foggy things.
Yeah, I think, yes, it can be. And also the BACP mentioned that you shouldn't really see a client where you're in a relationship with someone close to the client. So, you may be seeing somebody and then realise that, you're in a relationship with their mother or their father. That, I've known that to happen. That can be difficult. And also the same thing in placements. It's very possible that you see your therapist and your therapist may be working in your placements. I've known that to happen. Somebody turn up for the interview and sit in front of their therapist, and at which point that conversation probably in private needs to be had. And generally speaking, I guess as long as your therapist doesn't have any line managed, because organisations can be very big, people can have lots of roles. I guess as long as your therapist doesn't have any line managerial function over you, that can be taken into consideration. But, we don't have dual relationships for a very good reason. They should be singular relationships for counselling or psychotherapy, so that people feel at ease and people feel uninhibited in the therapeutic room and talk about all of their lives, not be audited.
100%. And you're speaking about kind of people that we know that our paths may have crossed, but you're 100% right. It can be members from the same family, and you as the counsellor may have, just in this example, the mother attending therapy, and then you may have kind of a first session where somebody is very easily recognized as the daughter of one of your clients. And there it becomes tricky because you're 100% in the frame of reference of your client. And if you have had a client who, and I'm just using this as an example, the mother has come in and has spoken about her daughter, then you already have a picture of who that daughter is, and you're not able to fully accept that person with that blank slate as they come into the therapy room. At least there lies the risk. But it also is tricky for us as counsellors because even as students, we're asked to undertake our own therapy. And as counsellors, it's good practice to dip into your own therapy from time to time when it is needed. It is a strength. So what we need to be watching therefore is, if we find a counsellor, is to check that there are no conflicts along the chain. For instance, if you were to find a counsellor, sit down with them, form a relationship, and then find out just a few sessions later that you share the same supervisor, that could be tricky. It could be tricky for you, could be tricky for the supervisor. So it's worth checking out those pathways when you first arrive. So the onus is on us as student counsellors when you go into that. If you are in placement, you do have a supervisor, ask the counsellor who their supervisor is. It's not a secret who a counsellor's supervisor is. They will tell you happily. It is not a confidential, well, it's a confidential relationship, but the name of the person will not be confidential. Just make sure that it's not your supervisor, because I know that has happened on more than one occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you're a school counsellor, as I was for 7 years, you have to be thoughtful, because you can see one client and then the next client starts talking about their new boyfriend or girlfriend, and you realise that that's your client. That can be really, really tricky. And I've spent many hours in supervision churning that one over. So, yeah, absolutely. You've just got to be thoughtful. And as always, I think in cases like this, if that does happen, supervision is the place to go to work it through.
That's it, isn't it? Because it is likely that role conflict or dual relationship may pop up at some time in your counselling career if it hasn't already. And it's then about how you manage that and taking it directly to supervision. Like you then said, Rory, working with two people within the same setting. As professionals, we can often hold that. We as counsellors can hold that if we're supported in supervision to be able to do that. So it doesn't mean an instantaneous breaking of that relationship. And I guess that is what's important about this is, what do you do when you find that you're 6 sessions in with a client and you do discover that there is a conflict in that relationship, or there is a dual relationship that was maybe unseen, Rory? How do you manage it?
Yeah, and how would you feel if you're a client and you're working with a counsellor, only to discover that your partner or relation was seeing the same counsellor? How would you feel? Would you be thinking, I can't tell a counsellor this, or I can't tell a counsellor that? It's a real tricky one, and it will come up. I can guarantee it does come up. I can't think of any therapist that I know that hasn't crossed that bridge where they're working with someone and a name's mentioned and a little alarm bell goes off in the back of the mind and it's like, oh, that's my client. So supervision, work it through. I'm not going to say what I did in that situation because I think that everybody would do things differently. And the lovely thing about the ethical framework, it gives us as practitioners autonomy to make informed choices. That's the key thing. We can make informed choices, and that defensible decision has to be informed by supervision, reflection, and professional consultation.
There's just so much to counselling, isn't there? There's all the theory, there's the skills that we need to practice, there's that attending and being there with the client, but the ethical side of our practice is always there with us in the room. We always have to have that vigilance, and Rory, you describe it as a helicopter type effect where you are 100% fully integrated in the relationship with the client, but there is a small part of a mature and well-defined practicing therapist that hovers as a helicopter and looks down on the relationship and keeps that watchful eye, that ethical eye across the whole of the relationship. And I guess it comes with practice as well.
It does. And, bridges crossed when you come to them, I think.
Well, we've certainly crossed that bridge of dual relationships, conflicting interests within our therapy room. And we're moving on now to practice matters and that topic of working with visual impairment, Rory.
Yes, well, I had a letter in the post bag recently of someone speaking about a client who'd been turned away by six therapists for the only reason was because they were visually impaired. And it beggars belief in this day and age that would happen. I would have thought that training would have covered working with people with a visual impairment. And interestingly enough, that person has contacted me, and we may be interviewing them for the podcast for their experience. But it just goes to prove that sometimes therapists just don't know how to work with what may be classed as a disability. So I'm going to be talking about working with clients with visual impairment. I was fortunate enough to train with a peer who was visually impaired, and I learned so much by just sitting next to her for 2 years. Just learned so much, and most of it was those kind of cringe moments where I did something and I got quite a strong rebuke. And I can share with you that one day I inadvertently helped her up. Well, I did help her up, and she slapped my hand away and told me in no uncertain terms she didn't need any help getting up. So that was valuable learning and a sore arm. And I'm going to share that. And I'm also going to share a little bit about some of the some things that can happen to people who lose their sight, and which I know from my own experience of my mother losing the sight. What we have to be aware of, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about Charles-Bonnet syndrome, which is something that's taught on courses for counsellors who are training to work with visually impaired clients. So I'm going to share a little bit of insights on that. Really interesting. And of course, there's a super duper handout to accompany it.
I just want to dive in, Rory. So let's dive into the next section where we're looking at that working with visual impairment in practice matters after this very short message.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Working with sight-impaired clients. Recently, I received an email from a person who had contacted 6 counsellors only to be turned down because he was sight-impaired. One counsellor told him they would have to contact their supervisor before proceeding. This conversation left me frustrated and bewildered in equal measure. I wondered what misconceptions people might have to turn someone down who was sight impaired, or even to have to speak to their supervisor. During my training, I was fortunate enough to sit next to Jean, who was sight impaired, and I'm eternally grateful for her friendship and support during the course and what she taught me about supporting someone who cannot see. And this is what I learnt. A thoughtfully asked question, offered with the best intention, seldom offends and can clear up any misconceptions. In my experience, one of the most significant barriers when working with diverse client groups is the fear of offending, which hamper communication and can lead to all sorts of misjudged actions, including patronising people. If in doubt, ask. This is a good way of developing a better understanding of your client's needs and for them to tell you what they want. Don't audit yourself. Don't be afraid of using words such as I see, it looks like, the picture you paint of the situation is. Sight impaired people do have an imagination, and if this doesn't work for them, they will probably tell you. Other considerations: health and safety. If you work for an agency, there will be a fire procedure and an escape plan. Ask the client what they may need in terms of guidance if you have to leave the building. Some clients may be happy to link your arm, others may be happy for you to walk in front of them while they put their hand on your shoulders. Others may just be happy to leave the building. They may be able to navigate the building without any particular difficulty. The same procedure may be for finding the toilet. So those kind of questions, if asked in a respectful way, will clear up any misconceptions and be able to put you in a position of working with the client in front of you. If you are guiding someone and they encounter stairs, tell them if they go up or down. It's something that sighted people take for granted. But in my experience of guiding Jean, there were times where I didn't tell her, and she found herself not being able to place her weight properly because she didn't know if she was going upstairs or downstairs. So that's really useful. Don't rescue by grabbing someone's arm without permission. This is a faux pas that I made, and I can seem to remember my arm was removed with a light but firm slap, and a request that Jean didn't need any particular help being picked up or moved around. It was a little bit embarrassing at the time, but it was a learning curve and one I'm very grateful for. Also, things like contracts. Ask the clients if they want a copy of the agreement sent via email to them, as they may have text-to-speech software. Also, considering recording the contract if that's what they need. Certainly do a verbal one. Again, it's all about asking the client what works for them. If they have a guide dog, don't be tempted to pat or fuss it like a family pet. These are working animals and don't need to be distracted. They have a job to do, which is supporting and guiding their owners, and patting and making a fuss of a guide dog can get them confused and off what they need to do. And also, don't presume that because a client is sight impaired that their difficulties are generated by this. This is a form of stereotyping. It's possible that they may have difficulties generated by being sight impaired or blind, but the difficulty with that is that they may not have. It may be that that presumption doesn't work because they have difficulties generated like anybody else in their life: bereavement, loss, separation, loss of identity. All these things that every other client has. So again, just work with the client on what they want to discuss. Finally, if a client says they hallucinate, don't jump to the conclusion that a client has a mental health issue. It's not unusual for those who have lost their sight or have macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, or glaucoma to experience vivid visual hallucinations. There's a condition called Charles-Bonnet syndrome, sometimes referred to as CBS, in which individuals can see a range of images from flashes of light, colours or shapes. Some may see geometrical grids and lattices. Others report seeing disembodied heads, people in Edwardian dress, snakes and other scary creatures. If there's something that's troubling the client, get them to speak to their GP. Now, I've also included links in the handout for further research and information gathering on working with clients with sight impairments. And just one final message. If you're happening to be listening to this, Jean, my arm is still hairy. This was our little joke, and one of the ways that Jean could identify it was me guiding her.
Thank you as always, Rory. Such an important topic and something we need to really think about, take time. And, in leading into this, you spoke about how you had the fortune of studying with someone who was visually impaired, and they were congruent with you. They were truthful with you. They set you right. They could tell you because you were on the same course. You were a peer. You were an equal. You were their friend. And I guess we don't have that same luxury when working with someone who appears in our therapy room, in that they may not tell us. They may be left feeling uncomfortable from the way we act. So it's good to delve in. Look at practice, because practice does matters. And if you want to get Rory's super duper handout from today's Practice Matters, you can do so. It's free. And you get that by going to counsellingtutor.com. That is our mother website, counselling with 2 L's, because we're based in the UK. Counsellingtutor.com. Click on the top tab, which will take you to the podcasts, and go to episode 110. That's today's episodes. All the show notes from what we've spoken about today, you will find there, including any links to additional resources. And Rory's super duper resource can be downloaded from within that page. You put in your name, your email address, and we will send it directly to your inbox. And of course, if you are already a member of our paid for resource, which is the Counselling Study resource, well, that handout is already sat waiting for you in your handouts vault. Just log into CSR and it is there for you. So moving away now into counselling and the law.
Yes, and I thought, bearing in mind that I've just talked about working with clients with visual impairment, that we might talk about one law that therapists work within all the time. And that, of course, is the Equality Act of 2010. And the Equality Act of 2010 brought together 9 different pieces of legislation. So up till 2010, there was 9 different legislations: the Equal Pay Act, Sex Discrimination Act, Race Relations Act, Disability and Discrimination Act, Employment Equality, Religion or Belief, Employment Equality Sexual Orientation Regulations, Employment Equality Age Regulations, Equality Act of 2006, take a breath, and the Equality Act Sexual Orientation Regulations 2007. And in 2010, those were all brought together over an umbrella piece of legislation, which we call the Equality Act. And within the Equality Act, there are 9 protected characteristics. So protected characteristics are laws specifically to protect people with specific characteristics. Now, I'm just going to go through them. Age. You cannot discriminate against anyone on age. Disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex or sexual orientation. So those are what are called 9 protected characteristics. If we think about the counsellors who turned away the sighted, visually impaired client, almost certainly there is something to be answered to under one of those protected characteristics, which is disability. You cannot say you cannot visit a counsellor because you're visually impaired. So these laws, these regulations, ask people to make reasonable adjustments, and usually it is more aimed at big businesses and organisations. So on a very basic level, having a disabled toilet that can be accessed on the ground floor, maybe having a ramp so wheelchair users can access a building. Not discriminating against someone because they've had gender reassignment, and they decide they want to transition from being a man to a woman or a woman to a man. And this is a kind of piece. This is a piece of legislation that we work under all the time, and I don't think, Ken, that counsellors sometimes realise that. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, we're called on to practice within the law. We have to comply with regulation, and the onus is on us as counsellors, as therapists, to know what that law is. So ignorance of the law is not a defence. We are expected to know it. We are called on to know what is happening with the law. And I love the Equalities Act because it levels the playing field and it reduces the risk of prejudice, really. And that's something that we face when we do counselling training. It's so often people say, why is the counselling training so many years long? And it is so many years long because we have to question ourselves, our own beliefs. When we look to the legislation in the Equalities Act, it very clearly says that we may not discriminate based on those 9 protected areas. Irrespective of what an individual's own prejudice or belief may be within those areas. So I'm grateful for that because it does level the playing field, but it also calls back to that counselling training where we examine our own beliefs and our own prejudices and really look at them and question how might we work with that person when they come in front of us. And like you say, Rory, it is the law.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I'm 60 now, 61, hurtling towards 61, and I can remember a time where a woman would be literally removed from employment when she became pregnant. That was it.
Yep.
You have to stay at home and look after your child. And as someone of Irish descent myself, my father was Irish, there would be signs on the door saying no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, when people were renting property, where being gay or being homosexual, to be precise, was against the law. I grew up in a time where I would have had people at my school who were gay and they would have been breaking the law, finding someone they loved. In fact, up until a few years ago, I think it was up till 2000, it was illegal for 2 gay men to hold hands in public. Can you believe that? And we've changed so much. We've moved on. And I think sometimes we look at the Equality Act and people say, oh, equality. But people don't realise how bad it used to be. People just don't realise. And I remember it because I was around at that time. So we work under the Equality Act. And if you don't know what the Equality Act is, I suggest you have a look at it because every therapist should, in my view.
Yeah, the law is a deep subject. We have quite a bit of information on that on our main website, which is counsellingtutor.com. Just pop in there, look under the practice section. There is information on the law. And we need to understand the law. There's much more than the Equalities Act. And this is such a broad topic. There's GDPR, so General Data Protection Regulation, which, again, many therapists may not even have heard of GDPR, yet we work under that legislation. If we're taking notes, if we're recording a client's details in any way, there's a duty, isn't there, to our continuing professional development for our diligence in looking and understanding the laws under which we work as therapists. And again, I go back to what I said in our first section when we were talking about the dual relationships and potential conflict within those, is that it's a big ask to be a therapist. There's a lot that we need to consider to be a practicing therapist. Absolutely.
And, just as a final thing, yes, we do. We have lots of different laws, under things like drug trafficking, money laundering, acts of terrorism. There's just so many laws, and we need to be aware of them. But Ken, what a wonderful episode. We started off with ethics and dual relationships, thinking about the BACP ethical framework and thinking about the relationships we enter into as therapists. Then I talked about working with visually impaired clients and talked about some of the tripwires that we can find ourselves tripping over if we're not really aware. And then, of course, we talked about counselling and the law. So with that, and as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.